Hello, good day, and let's talk about topic 1, climate change and its causes under chapter 6. Climate change is defined as the change in the average weather or the change in the distribution of weather events that may be limited to a specific region or may occur across the whole Earth. Now, for this topic, we will look at the different causes and the reasons why there is climate change. Now, the Earth's climate is influenced by many factors, such as the amount of energy coming from the sun, and also the factors or the amount of greenhouse gases or aerosols in the atmosphere, or the properties of the Earth's surface, which these things now determine how much of the solar energy is retained or is reflected back to the space. Now, there are two main categories or causes of climate change. The first one is caused by natural events, and these are things that we cannot have or we cannot control. And one example of this would be continental drift. We know that the continents that we are familiar with today were formed when the land masses began gradually drifting apart about million years back. And this drift also had an impact on the climate change because it altered the physical features of the land masses, their positions, and of course the positions of the water bodies. And the separation of the land masses also changed the flow of the ocean currents and winds, which affected the climate. The second one would be volcanoes. When a volcano erupts, it throws out a large amount or volumes of sulfur dioxide, water vapor, dust, and ash into the atmosphere. And although these volcanic activity may only last only for a few days, the large volumes of gases and ash can influence the climatic or the climate pattern for years. I mean, millions or tons of sulfur dioxide gases can reach the upper levels of the atmosphere, and when they are combined with the condensed water, it will form tiny droplets of sulfuric acid. And the problem is that this sulfuric acid can stay aloft in the atmosphere. Another thing is that these sulfuric acid are very efficient reflectors of sunlight, which in then they would act or this could actually act as a reflector that blocks some of the energy that we should be normally receiving from the sun. The third one would be the Earth's movement or specifically the Earth's tilt. And the changes of the Earth can affect the severity of the season. Like the more the Earth tilts, it means that there would be warmer summers or the colder winters. And if there is less tilt, it means cooler summers and milder winters. And the last natural cause would be the movement of the ocean or the ocean currents. The ocean are a major component of climate system. I mean, they cover about 71% of the Earth and absorb about twice as much of the sun's radiation at, as the atmosphere or the land surface. Now, these ocean currents, think of them as conveyor belt. They transport warm water to different land masses. Thus, these ocean currents regulate global climate, helping to counteract the uneven distribution of solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface. Moving on, of course, we have the human causes, and this is specifically pertaining to the greenhouse gases. We know that greenhouse effect is a natural process that warms the Earth's surface. However, with the rise of these greenhouse gases, we now experience the sudden rise of our temperature. But what exactly are the primary greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere? First, we have the carbon dioxide. And this is the most important greenhouse in the atmosphere because this actually helps trap the heat in the atmosphere and helps us have a warmer temperature or weather. However, due to the changes in the land use pattern, there are deforestations, there are land clearings, there are massive agriculture and other activities. These all have led to the rise in the emission of carbon dioxide. And with this rise of carbon dioxide, the air temperature also goes up. The next greenhouse gas would be methane. And methane can come from many sources, and such as the emission from domesticated animals such as dairy cows, goats, pigs, horses, or they can also come from rice or muddy fields that are flooded during the snow sowing or maturing period. And methane can also be emitted from landfills and other waste dumps. And lastly, methane is also emitted during the process of oil drilling, coal mining, and also from leaking gas pipelines due to accidents or poor management sites. And the third example of greenhouse gas would be this nitrous oxide. And a large amount of nitrous oxide emission has been attributed or connected with the use of fertilizer. This in turn depends actually on the type of fertilizer that is used and how or when it is used and the method of tilling that are followed. Because the more fertilizer that we put on the land, and like we said earlier, if there is flooding or there is it is combined with too much water, this could actually this now will turn into nitrous oxide. And the last one would be nitrogen. Now, with the increase of demand for supply for food, there would of course be the increase for supply. Thus, agriculture comes in. However, with the increase of plantations such as beans or yes, or beans or leguminous plants, these plants actually contributes also in the increase of these nitrogen gases. So other ways on how human actually contributes to climate change is because of our daily routines. Like for example, electricity is the main source of power in urban areas, and all of our gadgets run on electricity generated mainly from the thermal power plants. And these thermal power plants are run on fossil fuels and are responsible for the emission of greenhouse gases and other pollutants. Then we also have the increased number of cars, buses, trucks, which are primarily um, used uh, for us to transport our transportation for our daily activities or transportation of goods. And this actually, of course, runs on petrol, diesel, or both fossil fuels, which then produce carbon dioxide. We also generate large quantities of waste in the form of plastic that remain in the environment for many years that causes damage in the environment and rise in methane gas. And lastly, we use a large quantity of paper in our work at school and in the offices. So moreover, timber is used in the large quantities of construction of houses, which means that large areas of forest has or needs to be cut down to meet these demands. Moving on, it is understandable that a growing population means higher demand for our needs, but this also means that there would be more mouths to feed. So since the land area available for agriculture is limited, um, high yielding varieties of crops are being grown to increase the agricultural input or output from that given area of land. However, this would require large quantities of fertilizers, and more fertilizers means more emission of nitrous oxide, which again result to the increase of greenhouse gases. So, with all of these causes, what are the visible impacts of climate change that we have already observed? First is that the snow and ice are already starting to melt, and there is changes, or there is drastic effect on the biological systems, such as forests are being turned into subdivisions. And then, of course, we can actually observe migration of animals are starting earlier, and the species or their houses or their homes are starting to shift. Like, for example, we could actually see a lot of animals migrating or going now to the cities. And of course, the number of animals are starting, the number of animals getting extinct are increasing. So how do we adapt to this climate change? First is that human needs, of course, need to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So for instance, through technological solutions such as coastal defenses, like for example, since um, mm, the ice, the glaciers are melting, of course, the body of water would also go higher or increase. Thus, there would be a higher possibility of tsunamis. So to protect ourselves, we would create these coastal guards. Or there is also reminders regarding our daily consumption of food, so that we would be lessening the um, amount of um, trash that we would be throwing out. And then, of course, there is emphasis on sustainable development that can help human societies reduce their vulnerability to climate change, such as training, seminars on um, like reduce, reuse, recycles, or other means on how we could use other types of resources so that we can conserve our um, environmental resources. And of course, there are mitigation measures that aim to reduce greenhouse gases that can help avoid, reduce, or delay the impacts, and should be implemented in order to ensure that adaptation capacity is not exceeded, such as, for example, like we said, um, less food intake. And then we can also observe today that there is a big movement, or there is a positive movement regarding the use of electric cars instead of fossil fueled cars. Okay, so these are just some simple introductions or overview regarding climate change